In this tutorial, I will explain how to work with the rule debugger in where I am. Please make sure you watch the business rules, processes, and the rule log tutorials before watching this one. If your business rules do not perform as expected, you may need to use special tools to find out what's wrong. One of such tools is the rule log that shows in detail what's going on in the system. Another tool that can be extremely useful is the rule debugger. The rule debugger is very similar to debuggers used to debug code written in some programming language. The idea is that you can set one or more breakpoints on the lines of your code, and the system stops when execution reaches the breakpoint. At this point, you can inspect the data, local and global variables, expressions, and so on. You can then continue one line at a time and see how your lines of code get executed. In the Where I Am rule debugger, you can set breakpoints on business rules, wherever those rules are used. For example, rules of a process, rules of a business object, notification, and so on. Whenever Where I Am executes those rules, the system will stop and show you the current context, the stack, and the log up to this point. You can set breakpoints not only on rules, but on actions of the rules. Let me show you. First of all, breakpoints can be set only on rules that belong to the business space version in either current or under test states. You cannot set breakpoints on obsolete versions or versions in development. So to set a breakpoint, you must go to the rule, and then click on the Debug View button here. This view shows rules and actions on separate lines. You can expand and collapse rule actions like so. To set a breakpoint, you can double-click on either the condition of the rule or a particular action. When the breakpoint is set, you can see the corresponding line in a different color and a little icon next to the rule. To delete a breakpoint, double-click on it again. There is also a special breakpoints window that lists all the breakpoints that you have in all applications. Well, when you double-click on the breakpoint in this window, the system takes you to the corresponding rule. You can also delete a breakpoint in this window by selecting the breakpoint and clicking on this icon here. So now let's set a breakpoint and see what happens when the system reaches this breakpoint. Here we have the library sample application and the borrow item process. This process is called from the form of the library member object when the user clicks on the New Loan button. Let's see what the process does. The input of the process is the member object that borrows the item. First of all, it lets the member pick the library item that he wants to borrow. The system then checks availability of this item, and if the item is available, creates an instance of the loan object initialized with the member and item. Obviously, at this point, rules of the loan object start executing. And then the system displays the success message. So let's set a breakpoint at the start of this process. Let's now go to the browser, go to some library member, and click on the New Loan button to kick off this process. As soon as we click the button, the system appears to hang. But in fact, it has just stopped at the breakpoint. If we go to the configuration tool, we can see the special window, breakpoint view, which is displayed when the system hits a breakpoint. In the middle, we can see rules that contain the breakpoint. The rule in pink shows currently executing rule. On the right, we see the context window. It shows all objects currently in context. Each object is shown with all the appropriate prefixes. So here we see the member object, which is the input of the process. It has the prefix this. We can expand the object and see its attribute values. In this window here, we see a stack of calls. I will talk about this window a little later. And in this window here, we see the rule log up to this point. We can see that the most recent line in the log showing the first rule of the process. Note these icons here. The first one will continue execution of rules until the system reaches another breakpoint, and if there are no breakpoints, it will finish execution of the request. So when I click on this icon, I can see that the debug view disappears and the browser continues execution the current request. Let me cancel the operation and let us start the process again. Now we hit this breakpoint again. The next two icons here execute just one line in the breakpoint view. When I click on this icon, the system executes the current rule only. This rule allows the user to pick an item, so we're back to the browser again. Let me select the item that has already been borrowed. And now we can see that the browser hangs again, and we're back to the breakpoint view window. We can see that the current rule is the next one. Note that because the user picked an item, we now see the item object in context. I will keep pressing this icon to go line by line. So the system executes the report arrow action, and we're back to the browser again. Let me now select a valid item. So we start the process, hit the breakpoint, and I will keep going line by line. Back to the browser to pick the item. Back to the breakpoint view, and then I will go line by line again. And here, if I click on this icon, step over, I will step over this line and go straight to the next line like so. Note that at this point the system has already created the loan object, executed all the required rules, and put the loan object in context. So everything has been done. Let me start the process again. New loan. Back to the debugger. Going line by line. Selecting an item. Back to the debugger. Continue going line by line until we reach the create rule. And now, instead of stepping over this line, I will step into this line by clicking on this icon here. This means that the system will stop at the first rule that executes when the loan is created. Let's do that. So now we're executing the rules of the loan object, and we stopped at the first rule of this object. The context now shows the loan object, the member and item objects that have been added to the loan, and the system settings object that is used in one of the rules. We can see now that the stack window has two lines. The first line is always the line we're currently executing. The next one represents the rule that the current rule has been called from. Create loan rule of the borrow item process. Note that rules of an object are evaluated differently to process rules. First, all rule conditions are evaluated, and then the system executes relevant actions. So now we were going line by line, evaluating conditions of every rule. We can see the result of the evaluation in the log. And now we're finally executing those actions that have been put on the agenda. One of these actions creates an activity object. If we click on the Step Into icon, we will start executing rules of this object. Note that the stack now has 3 lines. The currently executing one, the previous one, and the original one. Let's say that we have entered these rules by mistake and we want to skip them altogether. To do this, we can click on the Step Out icon here. And now we're back to the rules of the loan object. Let's assume that I have already seen what I wanted to see in the debugger and I just want the execution to continue. So I click on this blue icon here and we're back to the browser, which has finished executing the request. So hopefully you understand the idea now. Let me just point out that breakpoints can be enabled and disabled. Sometimes it is useful to temporarily disable the breakpoint so that the system skips it and then re-enable it later. To disable or enable the breakpoint, tick or untick the checkbox here. Or click on this icon in the debug view.